What's up guys, welcome to the channel. My name's Micah and today we're going to be reviewing our 2023 Suzuki DR-Z400. I love these motorcycles. I've had a couple of these and this is one of my favorite motorcycles, not just dual sports but motorcycles of all time. It's at a great price point, it has everything you need. This is a very capable, reliable motorcycle that's going to last you for a long time. So we're just going to go over some features and specs of this motorcycle, kind of go over what it was designed for, where it excels, what it does best. I'll go over what I like, what I don't like about it, and then at the end of the video you should be able to decide whether this is the right bike for you. This is going to be our 2023 DR-Z400S. So this motorcycle has gone relatively unchanged since about 2001 when this model came out. They did have the off-road only 400s a year before that. But so over 20 years, this motorcycle has kind of just stayed the way it is right now. So it's going to be a 400cc liquid-cooled motor. It has one carburetor. This does not have fuel injection. So just a very straightforward, you know, old school platform. It has a 21-inch front tire, an 18-inch rear tire. This does come in a supermoto version that would have 17-inch wheels and tires, front and back. Also has inverted forks, as opposed to just the traditional standard forks. Now this is a dual sport motorcycle, the 400S, and so it is street legal in all 50 states. So it runs down the road just fine. As soon as you jump off the road, this bike excels just as well. The thing I like about the DR-Z400S is that it is just at home off-road as it is on-road. You know, it's called a dual sport, but I think the 400S model is definitely more geared towards dirt and off-road riding as compared to some of your other dual sport motorcycles that can conquer trails and light things off-road, but once you get to you know, some technical trails, hill climbs, more insane off-road things, you know, they kind of start to fall behind. But these DR-Z400s are definitely at home off-road. And of course, I can't keep anything stock. I have to rip into absolutely every vehicle I own. So this one is going to have a slip-on exhaust system that we put on. It does have the fender eliminator, kind of the tail tidy. It's going to have pro taper bars and grips on it, so those will not be the stock handlebars. They're very close, but they sit up just a little higher, and they're a little bit wider than the stock bars. Since we were replacing those, I figured we'd put on these pro taper grips that have a little black and yellow going on. Kind of matches the rest of the bike for this 2023 scheme. They kind of did a black with subtle yellow graphics, and I really like it. Gosh, I was searching everywhere for one of the 23 DRZs. Not that it's any different than the 2001 really, but I just figured these things hold their value so well that sometimes it doesn't really make sense to buy a used one if you can find a dealer that has a new one. So as far as some quick specs on the motorcycle go, I mean, it's curb weight, wet, with fuel, oil from the factory is going to be 317 pounds. So we did our slip-on exhaust. We dropped about 15 pounds by adding this aftermarket exhaust. So all said and done, we're sitting at about 300 pounds right on the dot. Fueled up, gassed up, coolant, oil, everything we need going down the road. As far as the horsepower and torque, this bike from the factory makes 39 horsepower and has 29 foot-pounds of torque. Now, as far as those horsepower and torque numbers, 39 horsepower and 29 torque probably doesn't sound like much, but when we're talking about a motorcycle that's only 300 pounds and has short gearing on top of that, you know, it really goes a long way. I've never had a thought at all that I thought this bike was slow or underpowered. As far as the suspension goes on this bike, you know, it just has the standard front forks as opposed to inverted forks that you might get on some of your other new bikes or MX bikes. but they work just fine. You know, with it being just a trail, dual sport, kind of off-road, on-road motorcycle, you'd have to look long and hard to find a spot and a test, an area where you would choose inverted forks over just these standard forks. They do just fine. I've never had a complaint on those. Just has a monoshock in the rear end for the suspension, so there's plenty of adjustment front and rear from the factory for all your preload and your compression and damping. From the factory, right when you get this bike, the suspension is a little bit soft, you know, if you're gonna do crazy off-road riding. It's very plush over the trails, but as soon as you get to more aggressive terrain, you're probably gonna wanna stiffen up your suspension. So as soon as I got mine, since I've had these DR-Z400Ss before, I stiffened up the front almost all the way that it goes, and then did the same to the rear with the preload and the damping. After you make those adjustments to the suspension, the bike's resting seat height is gonna go up about an inch or two. It just won't have that sag from the weight of it that it does from the factory. All your weight's gonna sit up a little bit higher as well as you're just cruising down the road. But as soon as you get to those jumps, those whoops, those hill climbs, whatever it may be, you're gonna love the suspension on this and the amount of adjustment you have from the factory. So now, and I did mention that this motorcycle has shorter gears, or shorter gearing than some motorcycles, and that term's completely relative, I guess. But all of your dual sports are gonna be geared a little bit shorter, right? None of them are gonna be totally built for the highway and the open road. Those shorter gears are what you want off-road as soon as you get to single tracks or more technical things. And you're just gonna have more felt torque with the lower gear that you're in, the shorter gearing that you have. Now these DR-Z400s have a 5-speed transmission. So it seems like a lot of the other manufacturers out there, whether it's on the 250s, 300s, 450s, 650s, 500s, 700s, we're all kind of seeing a 6-speed transmission in all of those dual sports. Now with those 6-speed transmissions, what you get from those are a taller top gear and a shorter first gear for the most part. Now while that really short first gear is nice once you get to off-road technical spots, and that tall gear is really nice on the highway and the open road. But do you need it? In my opinion, and in the riding that I do, and in my experience, I don't think you do. I enjoy a 5-speed transmission as opposed to the 6. I've had plenty of motorcycles with a 6-speed transmission. But having a 5-speed transmission makes each of your gears a little bit wider, and sometimes just bridges the gap just enough that whether you're on-road or off-road, you'll find yourself not having to shift gears, whereas otherwise on a 6-speed transmission you might have. So as far as the ratios on the gears of this transmission, in 5th gear, top gear, your top speed, totally maxed out on the throttle, is 94 miles per hour. Now, while that's really good for a 400cc dual sport, you're probably never going to do 94 miles per hour on this thing. But it lets you run down the highway at 60, 65, 70 miles per hour all day and not think twice. Your RPMs aren't too high at that speed and it cruises along at them all day just fine. Once you get to about the 75, 80 mile per hour mark, I mean, you don't have a tachometer on this DR-Z400, so you don't exactly know what your RPMs are at, but this thing is absolutely screaming down the road at 75, 80. That's about what it sounds like. So you don't necessarily want to cruise on the interstate all day. Now, if I'm running down the interstate for just a few miles, cruising at 75 is not a big deal, but you do not want to take this bike across the country. You're probably going to want something geared a little bit taller, maybe that's a little bit heavier, that would have your RPMs a little bit lower at freeway speed. You know, this 400 is kind of just the middleweight player in the dual sport market. You know, it's got more punch than your 250s and 300s, but it's not quite the big heavy tractor that a 650, 700, something larger may be. You know, it just kind of does everything well. It's light and nimble enough off-road. You can run down the highway, interstate if you have to. It just does everything. This is the do-it-all motorcyclist's motorcycle. As far as like the engine goes, the performance and reliability that you get out of this stock 400cc motor, I mean, these are revered as one of the best motors that Suzuki has ever made. These things are so reliable with just basic maintenance, basic upkeep. This motorcycle will absolutely outlive you and I. So while the factory output on these was the 39 horsepower mark, there's things you can do actually that a lot of people do to these 400s to kind of soup them up and get those power numbers a little bit higher. It seems like the most popular thing to do is a combination of 3 different mods, and those mods being a full exhaust system, modifying your airbox, or what's called the 3x3 mod. It's just cutting a hole in the top of it so that that airbox can take in more air, and then it's putting a jet kit in the carburetor so that then that motor will burn more fuel as well. So in those mods, you kind of need all of them together. Not just adding one or the other will really do anything for you. To get more horsepower out of these, you need more fuel, more airflow, and freer exhaust flow. So the combination of those 3 mods, depending on what you get as far as a jet kit and your exhaust system, I mean, you could see horsepower numbers close to or over the 50 horsepower mark. I always choose to just keep these 400s stock, right? They're gonna be the most reliable they can be in their stock form. I guess the only mod that I do as far as performance goes, but you don't really gain any performance from just that, is I always put a slip-on exhaust on these bikes. You know, I love to hear just a single cylinder thumper just screaming out in the woods or on the road. It always sounds really good. So I always put a slip-on exhaust. Just with a slip-on muffler, you're not really gaining any horsepower on this motorcycle. It really just makes it sound the part. So to me, that's why you get a DR-Z400, because it has more punch, more torque and horsepower than a 250, 300, or anything less than that. And you don't have to mod it at all. Like, that's just horsepower you get right out of the gate. So a lot of these people who mod their DR-Zs are really just people who are bored, or they have a bunch of buddies and all of them have DR-Zs and they just want to have the fastest DR-Z. So I don't think you'll ever be underwhelmed by the power on this or be wanting more. I've ridden a lot of motorcycles and religiously ridden these DR-Zs, and the power output is just perfect. I've never found myself at a hill climb or in trails or on a road that I just really wished I had more power. I mean, this thing gets up to 60 miles per hour in like 4.5 to 5 seconds, somewhere in there. So it's no slouch by any means. You can beat any car that you'd pull up to off the line. So it's got the speed you need for on the streets. As far as off-road, man, the torque and everything is just awesome, and you're probably not gonna be going, you know, 70, 80, 90 miles per hour off-road. I've just found it to be really perfect for everything that I do, and I've really taken these through the ringer and taken them to a lot of different spots to test their abilities in lots of different terrain. And these DR-Zs have just always impressed me and always gotten through every single thing I've ever thrown at them, all while being just a push-button, ready to rip, perfectly reliable motorcycle in the meantime. I've actually never had a problem with a DR-Z ever. Like with the engine, electronics, the carburation, like I've never had a problem with a DR-Z. And I've put in thousands of miles on these things, and they hold up. They have literally been 100% reliable in all my experience with them. Oh, and then speaking of mods, another thing it seems like more often a lot of people are doing on these is that they are putting different sprockets on their DR-Zs to either gear them shorter or gear them taller. And I have something to say about doing either of those. As far as gearing these taller, so gearing them wider to have a better top speed or be at lower RPM when on the highway. So this bike just wasn't designed as a highway cruiser, right? With it only being about 300 pounds, I mean, going 75, 80 all day on the interstate is unnerving and a white knuckle experience, to say the least. I would not want to take a road trip on one of these. Just the vibrations from that single cylinder engine at those RPMs are going to get to you. You know, if you re-gear taller to have lower RPMs at those speeds, at lower speeds and in your in-town riding or trail riding, your gears are just going to be too tall. There will be so much felt power loss when you are gearing these things wider. And first gear on these is not a short gear by any means, so I can't imagine having a wider, taller first gear, and that's what would directly happen if you re-sprocket it. You're just really shooting yourself in the foot as far as your off-road and in-town riding goes and your felt power if you gear taller. So while it may get you down the highway at 75 a little bit better, it's really just going to be detrimental in all of your other riding that you do. As far as like gearing down and gearing it shorter, you know, a lot of guys who primarily ride these in trails and off-road, commonly I'll see them gear it down shorter, right? To make their first gear, second gear, all their gears just go a little bit slower. You know, you're having a little bit more felt torque, I guess, as you're gearing down. But I have taken these things through very technical, single track, rocky, rough terrain, and I've never once wanted to be geared shorter. Now, the misconception and reason that a lot of guys want to gear their DR-Z shorter is because they will be going through terrain around the 5 mph mark, and they will find that they are having to feather the clutch through that terrain, right? So first gear is too tall that they can't have the clutch let out all the way as they're going through it, you know, otherwise the motor will lug. That's just going to be too slow of speed for a stock DR-Z with stock gearing to go. But here's the catch, kids. Rough, technical terrain is supposed to involve rigorous, you know, extremely precise clutch work. People start feathering the clutch when they get to that rocky, rough, or very technical terrain and trails, and they think that their bike is geared too tall because they're having to feather the clutch through it. No, that's exactly what you're supposed to do, is feather that clutch, right? And you want to leave your gearing factory, or at least on this, I think, because that first gear, you want it to have a little bit of speed. You know, you want your first gear to be able to get up and go and get you through and over stuff without having to shift to second when you're in the technical stuff. So even though you're feathering that clutch through that rock garden or around those tight curves in the trails, you know, when you get to that subtle hill climb, then you can just drop the clutch and mash it in first gear. You don't need to shift or anything to get up and over that obstacle, through that little sandy patch, through that creek or river, whatever it may be. The last thing you want to do is mid-obstacle, whether that's through a pool of sand, water, up a hill climb. What you don't want to have to do is have to shift gears halfway through that obstacle. You're going to lose speed, momentum, and power, and you might not be able to get over, through, around, whatever you're trying to accomplish. So first gear on this is totally comfortable, really above the 10 mph mark. At 10 mph and over, you know, I have my, in first gear, I have my clutch let out all the way. Everything is totally comfortable, the bike's not lugging. You know, in first gear, it'll take me up probably close to around 25 if I recall correctly. So your first gear really has that 10 to 25 mph zone. Below that 10 mph mark, yes, you are going to be feathering. Sorry, my camera died mid-ramble there. I don't even know what I was saying, but it was something about gearing in your first gear. Moral of the story on that, just know that if you're feathering the clutch in first gear through technical terrain, that is what you're supposed to. That is what you are designed to be doing. You want your first gear to still have enough jump and pep to get you through, over, around all the obstacles that you're taking. So I don't think that this bike needs to be re-geared at all. I have never thought that once. One last cool thing on these bikes, or about these bikes, that I think we need to make note of is that they have made this model unchanged for so long that all of your parts and accessories are just ridiculously cheap. I mean, we put on our handlebars, our grips, you know, full-fledged knobby tires, our slip-on exhaust, our fender eliminator, and rear LED light, all for $300. $300 for all of that, and the tires were just the majority of that. So if that kind of lets you know how cheap all of these accessories and different things for these DRZs are, and there's just so many. I mean, whether it's different front cowls, front headlights, graphics kits, fairing kits, skid plates, exhaust, pegs, levers, fenders, I mean, you name it and it is out there. Just go on Amazon or eBay and look up DR-Z400. Your mind will be blown. One last thing I'll say is that the maintenance intervals on this are great. They are a motorcyclist's dream. Your oil changes on this dual sport motorcycle are every 3,500 miles. You have an initial oil change at 600 miles after the break-in mark. After that, you just go to your 3,500 mile oil change intervals. Your initial check on the valves is like at the 16,000 mile mark. I mean, those are awesome. You know, once you kind of jump into these more high power, lightweight dual sports, like some of your Husqvarna and KTM and gas motorcycles, while they are very cool, and they look great on paper. I mean, they are lightweight, they are up on power, they have state-of-the-art suspension systems on them. The maintenance intervals suck on them, and the parts are so expensive. If anything breaks, you know, or even just oil filters or different things that you would need for your routine maintenance, it costs so much on the European bikes. The oil change intervals on all of those KTM gas and Husqvarna, you know, the 350s, the 500s, the 450s, they are every 500 miles. You couldn't even probably leave your own state and come back without needing an oil change somewhere in there. Whereas when you have a bike that your oil changes are every 3,500 miles, I could drive to the ocean today, and I live in Nebraska, and come back and still not need an oil change. It's the little things like that that will make your ownership of this motorcycle so enjoyable, that you can just be riding whenever you want. It's always going to be reliable. You don't have to be thinking about maintenance every other trip. Parts are cheap. The initial cost of the bike is cheap. I think the MSRP of this bike is $7,100 in 2023. For a comparable European model similar to this, you know, whether it's a 350, 500, 450, you know, you're gonna be spending around the $13,000 mark. It's gonna be almost twice as much for a motorcycle that is half as reliable, but it does crank out the horsepower numbers and is just a featherweight compared to all of the Japanese heavier dual sports that still use a steel frame like this one here. Now, while you think you might want that lightweight bike off-road, as soon as you're on the road, your 220 or 30 pound dual sport motorcycle is going to be blown all over the road like a feather. Like if you were out on the highway and a semi came past you or beside you on one of those KTMs that weighs 230 pounds, hold on for dear life, my man. That's gonna be a sketchy encounter. Whereas you just get a few more pounds on your dual sport bike, you know, like this one here that we've got sitting at around the 300 mark. It's so comfortable to just drive down the highway. You know, it's a windy day or a semi drives past you. You don't feel it, you don't think about it at all. Whereas those lighter KTMs, you definitely do, and you think that you might want that lighter weight bike, you know, off-road as you're zipping around the trails. So this is where I think a lot of the dual sport riders or potential dual sport buyers get confused and kind of get misled or have just the wrong idea of what they think they need or want. So everybody goes out to buy their dual sport. They think that they are going to be driving to the top of every mountain that they see and then riding down and doing wheelies along the ocean, taking the wood trails home, and then power it off in the garage just to do it all again the next day. So now it seems like 100% of dual sport riders and potential buyers have that exact idea. and how many of them actually do that, actually take their bike off-road all the places that they dreamed and thought they would. Literally, it's 1%. Like, go on Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace, look up dual sport. Every dual sport you see has been garage kept, never been off-road. It's in perfect condition, and if it's not, it's because it's a DR-Z400SM that some 17-year-old bought just to do wheelies in the parking lot, and he crashed more of them than he completed, and so the bike looks terrible. But a lot of dual sport riders definitely don't take their bike to the limit ever. They have this idea that they would, and all the places and things that they could do and go. And I mean, truth be told, the skill that you would even need to take your bike up a mountain or through those rock gardens or off those crazy big jumps or through those tight technical single tracks, I mean, you would damn near need to be a pro, like Travis Pastrana or something, to have the ability to conquer all of that off-road. It takes a ton of skill and ability to be an accomplished off-road enduro type motorcyclist. I am not some professional grade rider by any means. I don't race officially, nothing like that. But I have never found an obstacle, whether it be a rock garden, a hill climb, a jump, and a technical single track, that I could not do on one of these DR-Z400s, ever. Like, I've never found a place yet that my DR-Z would not go and that I did not have the ability to get it. These bikes are incredibly capable right out of the factory, right out of the crate. You know, to think that you need a bike with more horsepower or torque than this has, or something that's lighter weight, you know, I think that's kind of a misconception. You know, this bike is very capable, and you can start to have that idea that it's just not going to meet your needs or be fast enough or light enough if you're looking at it on paper and you're comparing it to all of these crazy high performance European bikes. But if you're the one doing all these comparisons and trying to find what's the right bike to meet all of your needs like that, you know, chances are you probably don't have the skill to even take this bike to its limit. You know, I think this bike is going to take 90+% of riders to their limit. You know, I don't even think that the majority of people will ever develop the skill needed to take this bike to its limit or find something that this bike is incapable of doing. So I guess I'll kind of just wrap this review up by saying that this is one of the best dual sports I think you can buy in 2023. You know, as far as value for dollars spent, you know, sure, it has a carburetor, it has standard forks, you know. The look of it, it looks like it's from 10 or 20 years ago. And it totally is, right? It's unchanged. The same technologies are just being carried over year to year. And that's what makes the parts and accessories so reliable. The reason that they're carrying that model over and over year to year is because this has been such a bulletproof motorcycle for Suzuki. There is literally like 2 motorcycles I like from Suzuki, and it's the DR-Z400 and then it's the M109R. All their other motorcycles I'm not really crazy about, but they absolutely hit the nail on the head with this model right here. You know, and we have yet to see another Japanese manufacturer try and recreate the 400cc dual sport. You know, we have Honda with the CRF450RL. Originally it was the CRF450L. And they've done a good job on that bike. Very similar horsepower and torque numbers actually to the DR-Z400. It's going to be a few pounds lighter, and then it does have the fuel injection. It has the inverted forks and, you know, the aluminum frames, some of the things that people initially think they want. But what keeps me from getting one of those 450RLs is that your oil change increments are every 600 miles. You know, we're about the same as those European bikes where you're changing the oil after every other ride. You know, your valve checks, I think, were every 1,500 miles or something. It's stupid. And then they have an aluminum rear subframe, and so they do not have passenger pegs from the factory, and you cannot get passenger pegs or put a passenger on the rear of your 450RL. The subframe cannot support the weight of the passenger, so it's just never going to be an option. I ride without a passenger 99% of the time. but having that ability to take someone, if you needed to, whether it's just a buddy or a girlfriend or whatever, just down the street or to a restaurant, or if you're in the trails and your buddy broke down because he bought a KTM or a Husqvarna, you can at least get him back to the truck and regroup, replan for how you're gonna save the European bike. God, I am absolutely murdering these European brands today. But no, I mean, they're cool, they're something different, right? They crank out the horsepower and you're just gonna be in your garage all the time wrenching on it. So, I mean, if that's your cup of tea, awesome, go get one, man. But anyways, yeah, I mean, for your DR-Z400, it's powerful, it's reliable, it just can go anywhere. The parts are so cheap. You know, it's just a great value. Don't let the carburetor and the standard forks, you know, the outdated look or gauges stop you from buying a DR-Z. It's just gonna be one of the best motorcycles you'll ever get, ever ride. You know, this is my 61st motorcycle. Thank you. Thank you. I like to say thanks to my mom, thanks to my friends, thanks to everybody who supported me. But no, that's the dead honest truth. This is my 61st motorcycle. I have owned dirt bikes, dual sports, sport bikes, nakeds, cruisers, bobbers, choppers, everything under the sun I have owned, and this is my favorite motorcycle of all. So let me know in the comments if you guys have any questions at all. Otherwise, go out and get yourself a DR-Z400, whether it's new or used, it doesn't matter, it's the same bike, and we'll see you on the streets. Like the video if this helped you out, subscribe if you want to see more, and until next time, guys, have a great night.
From the stud down on the corner block, I don't even notice all these plastic dishes